have with us today our current congressman from our brand new 7th Congressional District. We have Tom Rice with us today. And Tom, we couldn't be prouder of everything you're doing for us. And I'd like for you to come up and say a few words.
Well, I'm certainly honored to be here with you today. What a fantastic crowd. Georgetown County has absolutely turned out once again. I have been back here several times since my election. I am always amazed at the level of support. Georgetown County Alliance is all about economic development and jobs. And all you who are involved in my campaign know that it was based on jobs, jobs, jobs. The nameplate on my desk in Congress, it doesn't say Tom Rice. It says jobs, jobs, jobs. I've been working as hard as I can to put myself in a position to help this district and this country. The leadership has been so very, very good to me. We've been assigned to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Ports and Highways subcommittees, which I think is great for the district. We're on the Small Business Committee, and they made me the chairman of a subcommittee in small business called Economic Development, Taxation, and Access to Capital. We've already had one witness from the district, from Florence, come from the Institute of Manufacturing Technology, come and talk to our subcommittee, and we'll be actually bringing subcommittee hearings into this district to attract national attention to the benefits and the needs of this district and do everything we can to deliver on that jobs, jobs, jobs effort. And I also was placed, I'm very proud to serve on the House Budget Committee with Paul Ryan. And we introduced a budget, about 3-4 weeks ago that passed the House that balances in 10 years. And Paul Ryan deserves a round of applause for that. And it's passed the House. We've got a Senate budget for the first time in 4 years. Of course, it never balances. It has $1 trillion of new taxes in it, but at least they put one out there, and the Senate and the President's got one too. You know, we got a starting point. We got sequester, which nobody really likes. We've got a debt ceiling negotiation coming up here in the middle of May into the summer. And we've got a proposal for tax reform getting ready to come out. So there's a lot of reasons for optimism, a lot of reasons to think that we can make positive steps to put our economy back on the right track. There's a lot to be done. I had the good fortune of spending the last few hours with Mr. Speaker Gingrich, riding from Florence here. Believe me, I quizzed him on a lot of those endeavors and got his valuable insights, and they are valuable. What he's done for our country, you know, if you think back to, I think of charisma to describe him. I think of intelligence. He can speak and offer valuable solutions on almost any problem facing this country. And then when you think about effectiveness, you remember the contract with America and what good it did for this country and how it led us to a decade of prosperity? We need that same kind of initiative and effort today. And I can promise you there's a crop of freshman Republican congressmen there who are working hard to accomplish that every day. I am humbled that you chose me to be your congressman. I thank you for your support. I'm working for you every day. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate all you do, and I do want to let everybody know that we would hold Tom's feet to the fire. He really is doing a great job, and he's really sincerely very committed, and he's just really working hard, and we've been engaged with him and his office, and the staff folks that he has surrounded himself in his office are really great. There's a few other folks that, before we go any further, and apologize on the time here, that I'd just like to mention, and Jim Giroux. I would like to say, when I started a business in Georgetown County, you were chairman of the Economic Alliance, and you gave me mentorship and leadership during that time, and then you encouraged me to come along and help. And I'd like to thank you for all that you've done to try to advance economic development and commerce within our area here. And I just hope that I can partially fill the shoes of success that you've done, and I hope that I can encourage others to come up along and help keep these issues going. Congressman Brown, Henry Brown, the first time I met you was in the early 90s in the Mills House Hotel at a South Carolina textile manufacturers event. And I don't even believe you were chairman of the Ways and Means Committee at that time. But, your smile and your insight and your support of economic development issues, way back to then when people don't remember everything about you, you've always been there. You were always there, and you were always committed to this area and advancing economic development. And I'm sure that I can go around this room and really call out tons of people. But back during the old textile days, Andrews was town of Andrews was real close to my heart. That's why I immigrated to South Carolina from Virginia, was to work for Oneida Industries in Andrews. And Mayor Giles and Councilman Alford, Thomas, you've always been engaged in economic development issues, and I'm really proud to see you here today. And I guess with a little Oneida Andrews sentiment, I saw Richard Powers earlier, and Richard, it's I lost you where you are. They put you in the nosebleed section. Yep, no respect. But I really miss your dad. Your dad was a great friend at Oneida, and I'm really glad to see you trying to enter into public service. And I'm really encouraged and appreciate your efforts there. Sorry to ramble about such things, guys. But thank you for that. I want to say Congressman Napier, who lives in Georgetown County with his wife Pam, introduced me to the speaker a couple of years ago or so. And I had the opportunity to talk with him specifically about Georgetown Port, infrastructure needs within the Waccamaw PD region, and what the impact of these infrastructure issues had specifically to economic development and commerce within our region. And I'm really speaking from the heart here that I was really blown away. I was blown away by the concise knowledge, the background, the precision of understanding, just that intimate knowledge of understanding infrastructure issues, and specifically how it in fact affected our region. I was so impressed with Speaker Newt Gingrich that I have just been thrilled that he was so willing to come here and speak with us today. And along with his leadership, you look at his accomplishments, and we could sit and talk about this man's accomplishments forever and what he has truly done. But what a lot of folks may not realize is since he was in Congress in 1999, he has remained engaged in the policy debate, public policy debate, the crafting of policy as it affects economic development. And he is extremely interested and has particular interest in economic development policy and energy policy as it affects economic development. So at this time, I'd like for us to extend a very warm welcome to Speaker Newt Gingrich.
Tim, thank you very much. I think I have two microphones now. Is this working?
Yes.
Can you hear me in the back? Okay, good. I feel more secure then. I wasn't comfortable when the table up front said yes. I want to start, though, and say how grateful I am. First of all, I remember still vividly, I was telling the sheriff, the get-together we had last year over at Land's End was unbelievable. And coming here, that was one of the high points for Calista and me. And Calista does send her regrets that she was, we had a very close friend of hers pass away this week, and the funeral's tomorrow night, and she left this morning, and I'm going to try to catch up with her tomorrow, but she did want me to express her regrets at not being here. I also want to thank John and Pam, because John Napier came to me a couple months ago and said, you know, in his experience, nobody had ever come back to say thank you. And Calista and I talked about it. You know, we had such a remarkable experience in South Carolina. We had so many people who were so committed and so engaged that we really decided that it was just exactly the right thing to do. So I'm here in part to say thank you to all of you, and particularly thank you here in Georgetown, where it was such an amazing event, and we just had a remarkable time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Tim and economic development in a minute. I do thank the sheriff for having both last year and now again today helped us. And of course, Congressman Brown, we go back a long way, and it's great to have you here. I also am really, really delighted with your new congressman. We came down together today, and Tom and Renzi are going to make a big impact in Washington. And we were comparing notes on various projects he's working on, and I think you're going to find him growing into a real leader as he develops some of these things. So I'm just thrilled to be here and to have a chance to be with Tom. I want to talk about three things. Excuse me. I want to talk, first of all, about a very simple concept that seems to be very difficult to get across in Washington. And that's the concept of frugality. And I want to explain it because I think, frankly, we're off on the wrong track right now. Then I want to talk a little bit about how to modernize systems, which will relate directly, I think, to economic development here. And then I want to talk about the larger question of what South Carolina could do if it had really creative effort that tied together its energy potential and its infrastructure potential in a way that would be truly different and would really lead to almost a jump-starting of a generation of economic growth. So with your permission, let me start with frugality, and let me tell you how I got to this. I read years ago, Porter was the chief assistant to General Grant, and he wrote a memoir about being with Grant, and he made the comment that after Lee surrendered at Appomattox, as Grant gets on a train to go back to Washington that afternoon, that very afternoon, he is writing orders demobilizing the Army on the grounds that the taxpayer should not pay for the Army for a day longer than it's needed. Now, it reminded me of a whole range of those kind of things. Calvin Coolidge was very frugal, both personally frugal and also frugal as governor and as president. And there's a famous story of the Navy at one point saying they needed 24 airplanes for training. And Coolidge looked at the request and said, well, couldn't they just buy one and share it? Now, it's not that they bought one and shared it, but it was a psychological attitude. Gladstone, when he was Prime Minister of the British government, saw his job as reducing the cost of government to return tax money to the middle class taxpayer so that the taxpayer had more take-home pay. And so Gladstone would get all of his material, back then they were riding trains, and he would get what's called a dispatch box. It was a big sort of hard-covered box that had all of his papers in it. And he always made careful to send back the empty boxes so they could be reused. Now, let me give you an example of non-frugality, and there's a big difference between frugality and austerity. And I will just tell you, I am not in the austerity wing of the Republican Party, because it's not politically sustainable. People don't hire folks to give them pain. People fire you if you give them pain. And the difference is this. Frugality is when you say to your family, you know, it's going to be a tough year, so we're going to drive down to Orlando. We're not going to fly. We're going to stay at an inexpensive motel. We're not going to stay at a prime spot. We're going to fix breakfast in the room. But we're going to all go to Disney World and have a pretty good time. Austerity is when you explain to the family they ain't going to Disney World. Now, we can give up Disney World if we need to, but you'd better really need to. So I look at a $4 trillion budget. And I helped balance the budget for 4 consecutive years. I am the only Speaker of the House in your lifetime who helped balance the budget for 4 consecutive years. So I think I have a pretty good notion of how you do this. And you do it, first of all, by picking very large cost centers and getting them under control. And you do it, second, by establishing an attitude of frugality across the board. Now, I was struck with this because I noticed a report in the Weekly Standard that the Vice President spent $585,000 on hotel rooms for one night in Paris. Now, I don't think that's frugal. And I think it sets a tone for the whole system. The amount of waste, we were talking about on the way over here with Tom, we believe, I published a book several years ago called Stop Paying the Crooks, which I thought was a title that even in Washington would be fairly clear, but it didn't go anywhere. And it starts with the fact that in Medicare and Medicaid, you have somewhere between $70 and $110 billion a year of theft. Now, I'm not talking about marginal mistakes or doctors who upgrade a little bit. I'm talking about a dentist in New York who filed 973 procedures a day. I'm talking about a guy who actually went to prison on cocaine, learned in prison that you could make more money stealing from the federal government, came out, founded a series of companies, each of which ripped off Medicaid, and as they would begin to audit each company, he'd bankrupt it and go to the new company. And he was at this for like 5 years, stole $40 million, finally got caught, and he told the judge it was safer than selling cocaine, and it was a lot more profitable. Now, so I would say to the House Republicans, where they have real control, and Tom and I have been talking about it, and I've been trying to work on the leadership about this, they ought to have every committee and every subcommittee just applying common sense and just going through every single department of the federal government and asking a simple question. Do we really need it? And if we need it, is this the least expensive way to do it? Now, I just did, we have Newt University, which you can go to, or you can go to gingrichproductions.com, and I just did an interview for 75 minutes with Mitch Daniel, the former governor of Indiana, on how to be innovative. They sold the state's turnpike for $3.8 billion, which they then applied to infrastructure. But when they applied it to infrastructure, they designed very innovative entrepreneurial contracts so that the contractor made money if they finished the bridge over the Ohio ahead of schedule and under budget. And they lost money if they finished the bridge over the Ohio behind schedule and over budget. And in some of the contracts, they actually made a bigger profit off the bonus than they would have made off the straight contract because they suddenly were incentivized to get it done that fast. He said in some cases, they literally had the trucks lined up to start work that were sitting there. The minute they signed the contract in Indianapolis, they picked up the phone and called and said, go, and they started work right that second. Because now they had an incentive to get it done. And they saved hundreds of millions of dollars in these contracts because they got them done faster, they got the bridges open faster, they got commerce started up faster. So I give you that as a way of thinking that we need to apply everywhere. I've told people, I'm not worried about the cuts in defense spending if we modernize the Pentagon. Because if we modernize the Pentagon, we will be able to save an enormous amount of money. And I'll just give you one example. A friend of mine is a retired Marine sergeant who also does military contracting. In his private life, he went out recently to buy 2 cars. He got each car for 1/3 less than its list price because he went online and he kept negotiating and looking and negotiating and looking until he got the deal he wanted. He literally saved 1/3 of the price of each of the 2 cars. He said what drives him crazy is, as a contractor, he can't do for the Marine Corps the things that would save money because the regulations, the red tape, the requirements make it almost impossible. So that's sort of where we're starting point. So I think we need a generation of frugality, and I think we need a generation that says the federal government ought to spend every dollar as though it's the last dollar of the American family. And if you can't justify taking that dollar from them, you shouldn't be spending it. And I think a frugal party could get reelected for a very long time, but an austere party is not going to. And our goal ought to be maximum economic growth with a government which is careful with our money. And I think that would make an enormous difference, and we get back to a balanced budget much faster than anybody currently thinks is possible. Second, I want to talk about how you modernize not just government, but the whole society. And it'll surprise some of you, but I'm going to recommend to your entire economic development group that you get one book and you read it and you discuss it. And I'm surprised I'm saying this to you. This book is by the former mayor of San Francisco and current lieutenant governor of California, who is a liberal Democrat called Gavin Newsom. Now, I guarantee you up front, on every social issue that matters, he and I are on the opposite side. But this book isn't about that. He looks at something all of you, how many of you have a cell phone with a camera? Raise your hand if you got a cell phone with a camera. Almost all of you, right? Now, this is the starting point because language matters. This is not a cell phone. It's one of the first things we have to change about how we think. This is a handheld computer. This has more computing power than a 2003 laptop. But that understates what this is, because this accesses the world through applications. So you can go to Wikipedia in real time, you can go to Google in real time. My wife likes McDonald's. She has a McDonald's app. So whatever city we're in, we used it yesterday. Whatever city we're in a crisis, if we can't find a sign, and if there are no, yellow arches showing visibly near us, she can punch in her GPS and her McDonald's app, and there magically is a safe haven. And she would have killed me if she were here, but she knows it's true. So my point is, there's nothing comparable in our civilization to what this is. This is the largest expansion of knowledge in the history of the human race. And we don't know how to think about that yet. Now, what Newsom does is very, very interesting. He starts with a game, I don't know if any of you ever played this. There's a game that you can put on your computer called Farmville. Has anybody here ever seen it or played it? It's over here is one, another one over here. So you can correct me if I get this too far off. In Farmville, people buy virtual farms. And then they can get virtual cattle. And then they can swap with their neighbors, and they can get tractors. And people get absorbed in developing their farm. Now, I don't understand that. My mother-in-law, who's 81, who would never have dreamed that she'd be connected to the world, lives in a very small town in rural Wisconsin. And this year for her birthday, we gave her an iPad. Now, she's had a laptop for about a decade. And she said, I don't really need this. And then they taught her how to use it. And she wrote us one day, I love my iPad. Because she walks around the house all day. And the iPad is intuitively responsive to your finger touch, faster than the computer. Well, one of the things she does is she plays Words with Friends. Now, do any of you play Words with Friends? I don't, but this is right. This is a Facebook product, right? She has like 20 friends, most of whom she's never met, that she plays Words with Friends. And Cliss and I go visit her, and after about an hour of chatting with us, she says, wait a second, Sally needs me to join her right now. And when we're sitting here talking with her, she turns and she plays Words with Friends for about 20 minutes. She goes, says, okay, I can talk to you some more now. This is a very real part of her world. Now, here's why it suddenly becomes interesting. What Newsom does is he invents Citizenville based on the idea of Farmville. And what he says is, what if it was real? So you're driving down the road, you see a pothole. You take a picture of it, your camera has a GPS location, you send it to your county road department or city road department. You get 10 points as a citizen because you're helping identify problems to be solved. Now, maybe you're the kind of person who can actually fill the pothole. So you fill the pothole, and now you get 1,000 points as a citizen. The people with the most points get to have lunch with the county commission or lunch with the mayor or whatever. But you start down a road of how do you go back to having a participatory model where you start moving power out of the bureaucracy back to citizens. And what Newsom then does is he shows you 200 pages of doing this. It shows you application after application after application. Now, to give you an example of the 10-year out future, and a lot of this is not much more than 10 years at the most. Google has a project called a driverless car. At Newt University, I did a 30-minute briefing on driverless cars. The cars that they have designed have driven over 500,000 miles in California without an accident. The only accident they've had was when they were rear-ended by a car that had a human. Now, it turns out, here's an interesting example. Driverless cars can drive close enough that in NASCAR terms, they draft. So if you watch a NASCAR race, if you can get in the slipstream of the car ahead of you, you actually get 15 to 20% better gas mileage because of the aerodynamics of where you're at. Well, a driverless car convoy would all be drafting. However, under state law, that's called tailgating. So states will actually have to adopt a modification that says, if you're a human, you're not allowed to tailgate. But a driverless car is allowed to tailgate. Now, here's where it starts to get interesting. I have a friend who's 78 who has macular degeneration. If he had access in his neighborhood to a car that allowed him to walk out and say, take me to the party at my friend's house, he would dramatically improve the quality of his life. I have another friend who has a daughter who was born with Down syndrome, and she's just well enough that she's able to go to work and do simple things, but she can't drive to get to work. And you start to all of a sudden see things that you wouldn't automatically think about that begin to change patterns and change things. So the guy who's invented the driverless car for Google is a guy named Sebastian Thrun, who's a German-born engineer, now an American citizen. Last year, and the story is going to all come back to right here in Georgetown. Last year, Thrun decided he would teach a class at Stanford in advanced computing. And he announced online that if you wanted to, you could sign up online to take his course. He had 400 students in the class at Stanford. He had 151,000 students online. 140,000 graduated. What he found, I talked to him about it, he said what he found really sobering and humbling was, if you were a student, the top student at Stanford was number 441 on the final. So 440 students who were not in his class beat the best student in his class. Now, first of all, if you think about it, what a brilliant strategy for Google to have potential job applicants. Because they now know lots of people all over the world who did really well at advanced computing. But second, Thrun said to me, and I thought this showed great self-awareness, he said, it was pretty humbling because he always loved his lectures. And he realized that actually you were better off to take the problem-solving version of the course. You would learn more by not sitting through his lectures. That led him to found a company, which you can Google, called Udacity. It's Audacity without the A. And the goal of Udacity, the stated goal of Udacity, is to reduce tuition by 90%. And they've signed the first contract with San Jose State to offer 300 classes, or students for 300 students. The University of Wisconsin has now announced that they're going to create a 4-year degree online with no residency requirements. And this is the beginning of a crash in the cost of education. But now let me carry the stage further. So you'll begin to come back to right here at home. And this is why I think if you were to read the book and you were to think about it and you'd come back to Tom and to me and say, here are the ideas we have, you'd begin to see how rich this is. I believe, and this is a bill that maybe we can get introduced in the Congress and we ought to get introduced in the state legislature. We should have a requirement that if you draw unemployment compensation, you have to sign up for a training program so you're using your time that we're paying for in order to learn to improve the value of the workforce. So we, now all of a sudden with the Udacity type of model, we can allow people to learn 24/7. And the question doesn't become, why are you currently illiterate? The question becomes, why are you still going to be illiterate? There's a program which is free, you can look it up, called Duolingo. And Duolingo is a free language training program in like 27 languages. And it's a different world. There's a doctor in San Diego who's written a book on this, he takes exactly the same kind of iPhone I've got. And on an NBC News show, we're going to do this on Newt University in the near future. On an NBC News show, he holds this phone, literally a phone, up to a patient's chest. He's a cardiologist. And he said, that was an $800 procedure last year. Reads, touches the correct app, reads the patient's vital signs, looks at it in real time. Not go down the hall, you'll get tested, we'll get you the results in 3 days, in real time. And the reason I'm telling you, I have a practical reason, and Georgetown is the right size. Here's the trick to really great innovative breakthroughs, and I say this as a historian who spent a large part of my life studying them. You have to be small enough to act and big enough to be capable of acting. If you're too small, you don't have the talent and you don't have the resources, and you can't break out. If you're too big, you have tons of talent and they can never agree on anything. Now, it strikes me that Georgetown has, we were talking earlier about entrepreneurial development. Georgetown could look at the potential of the handheld computer, applying it to medicine, applying it to learning, applying it to reducing costs. I'll give you one last example that I would love for somebody to try this out. And I've talked about this for 20 years and I've failed totally. There is a business to be made collapsing costs. Give you an example. Cliff and I like to go on cruises. There is a site called vacationstogo.com, which aggregates every cruise in the world that is reducing its prices. And of course, all the cruise companies have phony prices, which they then reduce. So you understand this is a game. The number of people who pay full fare on cruises is a test of the number of people whose IQ is really low. Well, last year we had a window after she got done singing in the choir, and we had a 2-week window. So we went online literally in mid-July, looking for mid-August. We got 85% off. Now, at 85% off, you can actually start doing things. The reason I cite that is every government, every business ought to have somebody who's thinking every day about how do I find the greatest possible cost reductions. And Bill Joy at Sun Microsystems captured the problem brilliantly. He said 15 years ago, he woke up one morning, his job was, how do I do research and development for Sun Microsystems? He said he woke up one morning and he suddenly realized 95%, 19 out of every 20 breakthroughs would not be its sun. Now, if that's true, that means his job is to spend 95% of his time looking around the world for the breakthroughs and 5% managing research at Sun, which is a totally different model of how the world's working. So you have the same opportunity. What I'd love to see somebody try sometime is to put together a citizens consumer center so that all the citizens of Georgetown, the county, would become in effect part of a co-op. And if somebody wanted to buy something, they could check, it'd be almost like a giant eBay. And you would scan every new site that comes up, because even though eBay helps and Craigslist help, the newer sites are on, there's so many of them you can't keep track of it. I think there are 1 million applications now for the iPhone. I mean, think about that. 1 million applications. There's a kid in London who just sold his brand new application to Yahoo for $17 million. I'm sorry, for $30 million. He's 17 years old, and he has 3 people in his company. And Yahoo gave him $30 million because they think it's such a big breakthrough. This stuff is going on all the time. And I think we're at the edge. This is why I'm an optimist. I don't care how hard Obama tries to bureaucratize the country. We're going to de-bureaucratize it through information faster than they can bureaucratize it. And we're presently going to break loose from government at every level. You watch. There will be less government 20 years from now at every level, and more citizen empowerment at every level. So I think this is a very large idea. I think it has enormous implications for every aspect of our lives. I think we'll be more prosperous, healthier, better educated, and live longer and more independently 20 or 30 years from now because of this explosion of knowledge that is happening all around us. Last thing I want to talk about is what I'll say tonight, or late this afternoon at Myrtle Beach. You have offshore enough natural gas that if developed, it will probably pay a minimum of $250 million a year in royalties to South Carolina if you can pass a bill that gives you the same share of royalties that the Gulf Coast gets. Today, the Atlantic Coast doesn't get any royalties today, but that's just a passing anomaly because we've now set the precedent, and I worked very hard to help get this done in the Bush years. We've now set the precedent that offshore ought to be split with 37% going to the states, 37.5%, 12.5% going to the Land and Water Fund, and 50% going to the federal government. What I'm recommending you consider seriously is developing something which nobody's done yet, which is royalty bonds. That is, bonds whose payoff is tied to the royalty from natural gas. $250 million a year means you could issue 30-year bonds somewhere between $4 and $7 billion worth. That means you could modernize the Port of Charleston. You could modernize Georgetown's port. You could build I-73 to Myrtle Beach. And you could substantially modernize the other interstates that need to be upgraded in order to deal with the explosion in new manufacturing opportunities. All of that could then be amortized by the royalties. Given what we're learning, the U.S. government yesterday, literally yesterday, announced that there was between 2 and 3 times as much natural gas and oil in North Dakota and Montana as they thought there was. That's just yesterday. My hunch is, as we dig deeper offshore, we're going to discover that the reserves are vastly bigger than we think they are, because every place we go now, the reserves are bigger than we think they are. You look at the Marcellus, the Utica Shale, the Eagle Ford. It is amazing, the explosion of energy. So I want to encourage you, both to encourage your congressional delegation to pass an empowering bill that gives you access to the royalties, but then also to encourage your state delegation to create an authority that would take the royalty money, keep it out of the general fund, put all of it directly into infrastructure. The last thing, which is one that Tom is very much aware of, we have to modernize the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers today takes longer to study a harbor than it took to widen the Panama Canal. I mean, we are simply, literally red taping ourselves out of competition. So that has to be done. Anyway, I've given you a huge block of things to think about. I don't want to run on too long, but
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was a wonderful speech. We enjoyed it very much. We appreciate you being here in Georgetown County, South Carolina. It's a great day in South Carolina to have Mr. Speaker here with us. Thank you all for coming. These are some of the things the Alliance does for this community. We appreciate your support, and y'all have a great day, and come join us tomorrow at Land's End if you can.